So, of course, the even bigger news, in addition to canceling billions of dollars in debt that they owe us, is the fact that the Biden administration authorized Ukraine to fire U.S.-made and supplied missiles deeper into Russia, following months of lobbying from Ukraine, which has the Russians apoplectic, saying this could lead to World War III. And a lot of people want to just dismiss that as empty rhetoric. I know you don't think we should. I agree with you. Explain.
Well, this is an unbelievably irresponsible action of an unbelievably irresponsible and failed administration. This war could have ended years ago. It could have been prevented entirely had Biden just had some little measure of diplomacy to understand the Russian concerns. But this current decision that now U.S. missiles, ATACMS missiles, will be used and fired deep inside Russia in the waning days of a failed administration, it's just such a reckless disregard for our safety and for our lives. President Putin's been making the point all along that, look, if you use these particular weapon systems, this is Americans that are doing the targeting, that are essentially launching these missiles against Russia. And it would be like Russia, maybe in submarines off the coast of the United States, firing missiles into the U.S. That would be an attack by Russia on the United States. And Putin says, if you do this, this isn't an attack by Ukraine. This is an attack by the United States on Russia. It's perfectly clear. It's perfectly sensible. It's perfectly stupid that Biden is doing this. But what makes it all the more obnoxious, frankly, is that the Pentagon and Biden said before the election they wouldn't do this. They explained that this would not have a consequential result on the direction of the war, but it could ratchet up the war and lead to an escalation that could end up being catastrophic. So this very decision that was just made in the last few days was rejected. It was made exactly the opposite way a few weeks ago. But, you know, we don't even know whether the president is compos mentis. We have no idea who's actually making these decisions. Is this Jake Sullivan? Is this the Pentagon? Is this the CIA? Is this Biden? We don't even hear from the guy. And these are momentous, irresponsible actions. I can't really recall something like this before. I haven't trusted these people from the get-go because they have been failures on diplomacy all along. But to make a decision like this when it's the waning weeks of a failed administration that's lost the election, a new government's coming in, it's shameful and it's dangerous.
You know, my mom graduated from high school in 1959. I graduated from high school in 1988. And for various reasons, I think her generation and my generation feared the Russians, right? That during my generation, it was the Cold War, and even had these duck and cover drills in school. We were so worried about a nuclear standoff or conflict with Russia. Today, people are out Christmas shopping. They're debating Trump's cabinet picks. They're getting ready for Thanksgiving. No one's treating this like we treated what arguably was a far less provocative situation in the Cold War. Like, we're actually engaged in a hot war right now with Russia in Ukraine, but we're ignoring it, and it's escalating.
You're exactly right. And by the way, we should be afraid. Russia has 6,000 nuclear warheads, and we should understand Russia is afraid of us. We have 6,000 nuclear warheads. Both sides have 1,600 actively deployed nuclear warheads aiming at each other. They're afraid of us. And, you know, this has been, and afraid of us not in some irrational, crazy sense, in the sense that they actually don't want nuclear war, and they don't want the United States military and its missiles really on their border. And that's what people really need to understand about why this war is taking place in the first place. What this whole thing in Ukraine has been about is that our deep state got it in its head at the end of the Soviet Union back in December 1991 that we rule the roost. We can do what we want. We can go anywhere we want. We can decide where our missile systems are. We can leave any treaty we want. We can put NATO military bases anywhere we want. And that Russia couldn't do anything about it. It's literally that attitude, that arrogance or that hubris. And so we started this NATO enlargement towards Russia. And the Russians kept saying, don't do this, don't come any closer. And we said, don't worry, it's our choice, we can go where we want. Clinton started the NATO expansion against the advice of top diplomats and experts, military experts and so forth. Maybe he wanted the vote of the Polish Americans in Illinois or Michigan. That's so irresponsible. But the first wave of NATO enlargement was to Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. That was 1999. Then in 2004, George W. Bush Jr., another 7 countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovenia, and Slovakia, just moving eastward. And the Russians said, stop, okay, stop. And then Bush and Cheney and Victoria Nuland, now my colleague at Columbia University, the ultra neocon, they said, no, we're going to go all the way to Ukraine and to Georgia, right up against Russia's 2,100-kilometer border with Ukraine. And the Russians said, do not do that. Do not come to our border. Like we once said to the Soviet Union, do not put military bases and nuclear weapons in Cuba. But the United States said, we don't have to care. We can do whatever we want. And that went through, too, promising that NATO would enlarge to Ukraine and to Georgia. Then the United States helped to overthrow a Ukrainian government in February 2014 that wanted neutrality because
why doesn't
President
that get more attention? We lived through that. We covered that on Fox News. Spend a minute on 14.
Why doesn't it get more attention? Why doesn't it get more attention? Because the New York Times and MSNBC and the mainstream media refuse to talk about any history. And Megan, I know about it in the most absurd way because I could not get 700 words, even online. I didn't demand print, just online in the New York Times to respond to the fact that they said that the war that Putin launched against Ukraine was, quote, unprovoked. And they used that word 26 times, my assistant counted in their op-ed columns during the first year after February 2022. And the whole thing was provoked. And I happened to see it because I've been involved in that region for more than 30 years. And the New York Times would not tell the truth. They would not inform their readers, even with one online piece. They could.
So they're not going to talk about the fact that we orchestrated a coup in Ukraine in 2014 with Hillary Clinton.
They don't talk about any such stuff that we do. You think they were interested in who blew up Nord Stream? Do you think they were interested in who made the coup? Do you think they were interested in where the COVID virus came from? 1,000 things that are really messed up. They don't cover at all because they're kind of whatever the deep state tells us, whatever our official sources tell us, whatever our unnamed official sources tell us, that's what we're going with. And so they don't cover this stuff. They don't discuss any background, but they do carry a narrative. And the narrative is Putin's a madman and wants to recreate the Russian Empire, except don't worry, he'll never do anything with nuclear weapons. I mean, it's all completely inconsistent and incoherent. And if one understood the Russian side of this story, not only the NATO enlargement that I just recounted, but the fact that the United States, the U.S., unilaterally walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002. And the Russians said, what are you doing? We have a nuclear arms control framework for stability. And the U.S. said, nah, we do what we want. The United States walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty in 2019. We do what we want. The United States stationed Aegis anti-ballistic missiles in Poland and Romania, nearby Russia, and the Russians saying, don't do that. And the United States says, we do what we want. And then Putin asked Biden, we have reports, well, are you going to station missiles in Ukraine? And the report is that Blinken told the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, in January 2022, we do what we want. It's none of your business. And then we're surprised that there's war. And then we violate our own limits and we reverse our policies within days, and we have no deliberation in the United States at all. It's not just people going to the malls. Is there a senator or a congressman that's paying attention to this, frankly? It's just unbelievable what is happening.
It definitely seems like the Trump administration's aware. We know J.D. Vance is paying attention to this, but they've got 2 months.
He is paying.
Before,
he's gotten this completely. He understands this completely. And so President Trump has been very clear about this also.
I interviewed Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg at his economic conference, and then again, and the third time where we really sat down and went head to head on a bunch of things was in Kaliningrad, which is where they keep their nukes. And it was a really humbling experience to be in a place that with the press of a button could launch the annihilation of the world. I mean, you really feel it in a very acute way, and especially when you're across from the man who could do it, who, unlike Kim Jong-un, where Trump's like, I've got a bigger button and mine works, Putin's button works too. And people keep saying, like, he's evil, he's evil, he's evil. And I understand what's happened in Ukraine, and war is very ugly. But I've been saying to people, it's more complicated than evil. Like, he's strategic. He's making decisions that he thinks are in the best interest of Mother Russia. And we just dismiss him as this evil cretin at our own peril. Like, we need to understand the greater situation that got us here, and more importantly, that will get us out of here. And I think he is a rational actor. Like, I think Trump is right that he probably could get this thing resolved in a day. And how would he do that? How would he go about doing that?
Megyn, not only is he rational, he's extremely intelligent. And not only is this not some crazy act, it is understandable from Russia's point of view. And it is irresponsible from the American side that we have pushed and pushed and pushed because of an arrogance that came in the United States strategic leadership at the end of the Soviet period, when they decided, when people like Wolfowitz and Cheney decided we can do anything we want, we can have any wars we want, as literally Wolfowitz told General Wesley Clark, Russia can't respond, we can do what we want. It is that arrogance that has been the biggest problem of all for us, because it has gotten the United States into less and less security like we are in right now. Now, this war could have been avoided entirely at multiple points. I won't go through every bit of the history, but I will tell you that at the end of 2021, President Putin put a draft security agreement on the table, online also, not just on the table, so we could all read it. A U.S.-Russia draft security agreement. You could still find it online. And the essence of it was stop the NATO enlargement. I called the White House at that point. I talked to Jake Sullivan. I said, avoid this war. Negotiate. This is good diplomacy. He said, no, we have an open door policy. I said, that's ridiculous. There is no such thing as an open door policy that the United States gets to station its military bases anywhere it wants and expect others not to have a say in it, especially when it's Russia and their say about the United States military on their border. And he dismissed all of that. So that war totally could have been avoided. Then in March 2022, I think people are not aware that Russia and Ukraine actually agreed on a peace arrangement based on Ukrainian neutrality. And the United States nixed it. The U.S. told them, fight on. No neutrality. We got your back. And as I often say, yeah, we have their back, but not their front because they're being killed from the front. 600,000 Ukrainians dead since the U.S. nixed this little thing. And Ukraine losing land in the process. Every day it gets worse. But in our arrogance, we haven't stopped it. This is Biden's colossal failure. So could Trump end this in a day? Yes. And the way to do it would be to go to the core of what this is about. This is about NATO enlargement. This is about Russian national security. And to say properly and rightly, Mr. President Putin, you stop the war and we end this wrong-headed idea of NATO enlargement to your border. You view that as reckless. This was a bad idea. We need to keep a space between us. We are the two most powerful nuclear superpowers in the world. We need a little bit of buffer in between. Ukraine will be neutral. It will be secure. You stop fighting. We stop trying to draw it into our military orbit. This is how
what happens with
ends.
the territory that Russia's already taken in Ukraine?
Russia's going to keep a lot of that it's taken because that's ethnically Russian. And when Russia proposed, and again, you need to know the history of this. I mean, you know, but people need to understand the history of this. Russia didn't make territorial demands before this latest round starting in February 2022. What Russia had asked for, rightly, was give autonomy to the Russian speakers of eastern Ukraine. And that was put into a treaty backed by the UN Security Council unanimously, called the Minsk II Agreement. And what did the U.S. do? It whispered to the Ukrainians, you don't have to do that stuff. That's all right. Just ignore the treaty. And so what would have been territorial integrity of Ukraine was squandered, again, by the West, because we're very cynical and very arrogant. And so we think we can just get our way. And it
okay,
is...
wait, but let me follow up with you on that.
Yeah, sure.
Is it hubris?
Yep.
Is it hubris on our part? Or is it like a desire for war, or both?
I don't think it's a desire for war. I think it's being an absolutely arrogant, awful poker player. Because the United States kept saying, if we do what we want, Russia has no alternative. You can actually go back in a fascinating, completely wrong account given by Zbigniew Brzezinski, remember the foreign policy guru, who wrote a book in 1997 called The Global Chessboard. And he talked about NATO enlargement. And he has a chapter in it, which I went back to recently read because it's kind of the blueprint of what we did. And he reasons that we can do what we want because Russia has no recourse. And he predicts, he says, well, Russia will never side with China. Russia will never form an alliance with Iran. Wrong. So much is wrong. And he concludes by saying Russia has no option but to just go along with an expanding Europe and an expanding NATO. So he called it wrong. But that is how the U.S. acted. They were playing poker, with a lousy hand. And they didn't understand what was really going on. They thought Putin's not going to start a war over this. They thought, well, if he does, our sanctions are going to kill the Russian economy. I know that because I spoke to the U.S. officials about that as it was happening.
And Biden said it. Biden was like, just watch, come back and, let's check back in 6 months or 12 months, whatever he said. And Russia was fine. They had found other partners.
Exactly. And it was not hard to predict because these sanctions are always overblown. They can do damage, but they're terribly overblown. Then it was going to be our miracle weapon systems, our HIMARS and our ATACMS and all the rest that were going to do it. In other words, they kept saying, we'll win, they'll lose, as this keeps escalating. Obama did a lot wrong on this because it was during Obama that this coup against the Ukrainian neutralist government was launched with the U.S. on February 22nd, 2014. So Obama has a lot to answer for on this, but he did realize one thing. After that happened, he said, we can't get into a war with Russia on this because they have what Obama called escalatory dominance. If we raise the stakes, they'll raise it further. Because for us, going NATO enlargement, that's kind of a game. And it is a game from the point of view of Jake Sullivan or others. But from the point of view of Russia, it's existential. So Obama knew, well, they'll just keep escalating. I don't want to get into that. Biden is just so bad at this. And his team, Blinken and Sullivan, the whole team has been terrible. But the whole point is they played it like a game, whereas for Russia, this is first order national security. This is the most basic stuff. And this is why we need to take absolutely seriously the change of the nuclear doctrine, the fact that from Russia's point of view, they now regard the United States as actively attacking Russia with our missiles. And it's an accurate assessment, by the way. And I'm just hoping and counting on President Putin as a very rational and steely character, no doubt, tough-minded and very rational, to hold without blowing things up so that President Trump can come into office and they can discuss things rationally, which has not happened.
But it's almost what we don't want is to have
period.
Joe Biden depending on Putin's forbearance, knowing that Trump is coming in. There's only so far he can be pushed.
I agree. I'm so dismayed and shocked by what's happened in the last couple of days, because when the Pentagon said before November 5th, we're not going to do this, they explained why. This is dangerous, it's provocative, it will not change the course of the conventional war, but it could lead to nuclear escalation. They explained all of it. They actually sent the British Prime Minister packing because the British are exceptionally irresponsible in all of this. As a 19th century imperial power, they have their delusions of grandeur still, and they want the United States to do the dirty work. So Starmer came over to the White House, you'll recall, and tried to talk Biden into this, and the Pentagon said, no, this makes no sense. Now, what also is very disturbing about all of this from my point of view is that such a momentous decision was made without any explanation to the public by President Biden. I don't know whether he can give an explanation anymore. I don't know who really makes these decisions anymore, but it's not acceptable with our lives in the balance and with the administration on its way out in a few weeks to be making decisions like this and then period, but then not even accounting for them or explaining them.
That's right. And we see him, what do we see? We see him stumbling on the beach in Delaware, missing the photo ops at the G20. Like, there's no reason to believe he's in control and in command. And we just
that is correct.
Pray for the next 2 months.
And the responsibility
on a brighter note, let's do a brighter note, because I have heard you talk about, because I said this to my audience. When I went over to Russia those couple of times, I was floored by how loving the Russian people were toward America. They loved to hear that I was a U.S. citizen. They loved to talk about America. They had no animosity toward us at all. Our world leaders get us into these conflicts and have these, as we've just discussed, they're not thinking the way the citizenry is. But what could the relationship look like in the next phase? Once Trump gets in there and JD is in there too in his ear, what could things look like after we wrap this thing up, which I do think it will be wrapped up pretty quickly.
Let me just tell you that in December 1991, I was in the Kremlin because I was an advisor to President Boris Yeltsin on his economic crisis that they were facing. And I sat in the room in the Kremlin, and Boris Yeltsin came from the far side of a very, very big room out into the room from a back door in the background, walked up to the table and said, gentlemen,
Shots for everyone.
I was chairing a delegation, and he said, gentlemen, I would like to tell you the Soviet Union is over. He said, I've just been meeting with the heads of the Soviet military, pointed to the door in the back, and said they have agreed to the end of the Soviet Union. And then he went on to talk about how Russia would be a normal country, friendly with the United States, friendly with Europe, a normal market economy, a normal democratic country, how it wanted normalcy and good relations. And I spoke then and said, Mr. President, I am sure that this is how the United States sees it too. I am sure the United States is going to give you a hand in this deep economic crisis that the Soviet Union fell into, to help you find your way out of this in a perfectly fine manner. Well, I was wrong. The United States neocons did not want peace. They wanted dominance. They wanted what is called hegemony. They wanted to be able to move NATO where they want. They wanted to be able to put American missiles where they want. They wanted to leave whatever treaties they wanted. They behaved very, very badly. Could we have normal cooperative relations with Russia? Of course we could. That's what they wanted. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard it with my own ears. I was there. I saw it with President Kuchma of Ukraine. I was an advisor to the Ukrainian government also. We had the chance, really, for peace. But the neocons didn't want peace. They wanted hegemony. They wanted U.S. dominance. It was arrogance. And they played things so badly for so many years, for more than 30 years now, to get us to this absolutely parlous state that was unimaginable in 1991. Unimaginable that we'd be talking about whether there would be a nuclear war between the two countries. So could Trump and Vance pull this back to normalcy? Of course they could. And by the way, I have to say the same with China, because everyone says, oh, China, we have to hate China. China's our biggest threat. We have to be nice to Russia so we can hate China. This, too, is completely mistaken. We don't need to hate either of these countries. They both want peace and cooperation and economic development. That's what they want.
Russia is a more persuasive case to me. China, there's just been too much negative news about what they're doing. You know,
I mean,
recently, the police station, the secret police in New York, are threatening Chinese speakers there. I mean, the buying of the land.
We're sending billions of dollars of armaments to Taiwan that we, in our diplomacy, recognize as part of China. And if China starts sending billions of dollars of armaments to one of the U.S. states, you'll know that we have a problem. I have been going to China.
I agree with you. Now, having looked into the Taiwan situation, the smartest people I've talked to say we should not get involved in that.
Absolutely. But that's
Taiwan's already
issue.
part of China, and we shouldn't get involved over there. And no one wants to see American boots on the ground in Taiwan, and we should stop being so provocative with respect to Taiwan.
Bravo. That's the main point of irritance with China. The other point of irritance is the South China Sea, because we have a doctrine that we have choke points on China's sea lanes. If we would just calm down, we would find that there are plenty of grounds for cooperation. And that's the point. We need to calm down. We need to stop being in the other guy's face, especially the face of another superpower. We need to stop saying we can do whatever we want. We can send our armaments to Taiwan. We can strike with our missiles inside Russia. We have to get over that mentality, and then we're going to find that there's actually the basis for cooperation.
Now, I've heard you go so far as to say similar things about Iran. Now, that's going to make people's heads explode, because
Iran, let me do it.
They're trying to assassinate Donald Trump right now. Like, there's no world in which we can have. Okay. Explain it to us.
First, they're not, and second, we have been assassinating their leaders for years. By the way, this is not even this is bragged about by the United States. I happened to be in New York when the president of Iran came to visit, and I listened to him speak. He's a heart surgeon, and he talked about, as a doctor, he saves the life of anybody, whether he likes the person on the operating table or not. He spoke about peace the whole time. How was it reported in our media? War, war, war. The media, the deep state plays a lot of games with us, Megan. They want to stir up war. They want to stir up military contracts. They want to stir up the U.S. ability to do whatever it wants. I'm not buying it because I see it with my own eyes.